The wind that evening blew hot and dry across the desert, carrying with it the sharp scent of mesquite and dust. The rancher had just finished repairing the corral when he saw them, two figures on the horizon, moving slowly, almost painfully, as if each step took everything out of them. At first, he thought the heat was playing tricks on his eyes, the way it sometimes warped the distance into shimmering illusions. But as the sun sank lower and the sky turned to fire, he realized they were women, tall beyond reason, their shadows stretching like giants against the land. His first instinct was to reach for the rifle propped against the barn wall. Out here, a man didn't survive by trusting what walked in unannounced. But as the figures drew closer, the rifle felt heavier in his hand, and the fear began to slip into something else, something closer to awe. Their faces, though worn with exhaustion, carried the strength of stone cliffs. Their eyes glimmered with a strange fire, not threatening, but commanding. Their size was undeniable. They were Apache, but taller than any he had ever laid eyes on, towering above the fence posts, their shoulders broad, their legs moving with the rhythm of people built for survival. The rancher swallowed, his throat dry as sand. He wasn't a man easily unsettled, but there was no denying the strangeness of it. The women stopped a few yards from the barn, their breaths heavy, the dust clinging to their moccasins and fringed garments. One of them raised her hand, palm open in peace, but the way she loomed above him made his heart thud like a drum. "We are hungry," she said, her voice low, steady, and deep like the echo of a canyon. Her accent marked her as Apache, yet her words were clear. The other sister stood silent, her chest rising and falling with labored breath, her eyes fixed on the rancher as though weighing his soul. The man glanced back at his cabin, at the meager supplies stacked against the wall. He didn't have much, just enough beans, bread, and salted meat to carry him through the next weeks, but something in their gaze told him refusal wasn't an option. He wasn't staring at beggars, he was staring at daughters of the desert, proud and unbroken even in hunger. He set the rifle aside and walked slowly toward the cabin. "Wait here," he muttered, his voice hoarse with uncertainty. Inside, he filled a wooden plate with bread and dried venison, added what little beans were left simmering in the pot, and stepped back out. The sisters watched him with the stillness of statues, their dark hair flowing like rivers over their shoulders, their height casting shadows that made him feel like a child in their presence. He held out the plate, his hands trembling just enough for him to notice. The first sister accepted the food carefully, bowing her head slightly, and passed it to the other. They ate in silence, slow and deliberate, as if savoring every bite, not just with their mouths, but with their entire beings. The rancher leaned against the barn, watching them, uneasy but unable to look away. When the plate was empty, the taller of the two lifted her gaze to his. "You have given us life tonight," she said. There was no softness in her tone. It was a declaration, not gratitude. The weight of her words pressed into him, and he didn't know what to answer. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving only the red glow of dusk. Coyotes howled in the distance, and for a moment the rancher wondered if he had done something he would regret. Feeding wanderers was one thing. Feeding giant Apache sisters, whose presence felt like something out of an old legend, was another. But as the night crept in, and the two women sat cross-legged on the hard earth near his fire, their faces glowing in the flames, he realized he wasn't just looking at strangers. He was looking at the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, this single act of kindness had set wheels in motion that would not stop. That night, the desert was colder than usual. The stars burned sharp against the black sky, and every sound carried farther. The rustle of grass, the snap of firewood, the lonely cry of an owl perched out near the ridge. The rancher's cabin, small and built of rough logs he had cut with his own hands, had never felt so fragile, so temporary, as it did with the two giant women seated near his fire. They did not ask to come in at first. They sat outside as if the earth itself was their bed, their posture tall and unbending, their dark eyes reflecting the flames. Yet the rancher felt a pull in his chest, some mixture of guilt and hospitality that made him speak. "It's colder than a wolf's tooth tonight," he muttered, shifting uneasily at the doorway. "Come inside at least. You'll freeze out here." The taller sister looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. They rose in silence, and when they entered, the rancher felt the whole room shrink. His cabin wasn't built for people like this. Their heads nearly brushed the rafters, and when they sat down, their knees bent at strange angles to fit the small space. The fire in the hearth cracked, and the shadows stretched long across the walls, their forms bending and warping, making them seem even larger than they were. The rancher busied himself with small things, pretending not to be nervous. He set more wood on the fire, poured water into tin cups, and tried to keep his hands steady. Yet he could feel their eyes on him, weighing his every move. Finally he broke the silence. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. The sister with the stronger features spoke first. "From the mountains to the east. Our people are scattered. We have walked many days." Her words were clipped, precise, carrying neither plea nor apology. The other, quieter one, looked at her sister before adding, "We were told of water near these plains, but there is nothing here but dust." Her voice was softer, almost melodic, but carried the same strength beneath it. The rancher nodded, not sure what to say. He had lived long enough near Apache lands to know better than to ask too much. He watched them sip the water he had, poured, their hands large and calloused, yet moving with surprising grace. As the night wore on, the tension in the room shifted. At first it was heavy, like a rope pulled tight between them. But as the fire warmed the cabin and their breathing slowed, the air softened. The sisters leaned back, their faces illuminated by the glow, and the rancher saw something there he hadn't expected: weariness. Not weakness, but the bone-deep fatigue of people who had endured far too much. He poured what little coffee he had into a tin pot and set it to boil. The aroma filled the cabin, bitter and strong, and when he poured it into cups, the taller sister accepted hers with a nod. She sipped it cautiously, then looked at him with something close to approval. "You live here alone," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. The rancher nodded. "A man gets used to his own company." The quieter sister tilted her head. "Or he grows tired of silence." Her words struck him deeper than he cared to admit. He had been alone for so long that he had stopped noticing the ache of it, like a wound that had scarred over. But hearing her say it out loud made it roar again. He shifted in his chair, staring at the fire. They spoke little after that, yet the silence was no longer sharp. It was a shared quiet, the kind that settles between people who, for a few hours at least, have no need to fill it. Outside, the coyotes cried again, and the desert wind rattled the window shutters. But inside, the small cabin held something fragile, something that felt almost like peace. When the rancher finally spread out blankets for them near the fire, they accepted without question. Their forms lay long across the floor, like shadows carved from stone, their breathing slow and steady. He sat awake a while longer, staring at them, his mind turning circles around the strangeness of it all. He had given food to strangers before, but this was different. These women weren't just lost wanderers. They carried with them an air of destiny, as though they had stepped out of an old story and into his life. Something told him that the desert hadn't brought them to his door by chance. And though he lay down at last, pulling a rough blanket over himself, he knew he would not sleep easy. For in the morning, something would come of this, something larger than he could yet imagine.